Three, two, one. Hey everyone, Rich Lowry of National Review here, joined by my colleagues Noah Rothman and the notorious MBD, Michael Brendan Doherty. We have a factional fight on the right. We love factional fights. We live for factional fights, so we're going to discuss this factional fight. Of course, it's over whether Donald Trump should join in the Israeli military campaign against Iran's nuclear facilities that has been quite successful so far as anyone can tell. But there's some big facilities out there that haven't been hit or destroyed yet. Biggest looming Fardo. Maybe the Israelis have a way to get at Fardo themselves. They're saying they do, but they haven't yet. And whatever it is, it's probably not as simple and as effective as a U.S. strike using B-2s with these big bunker buster bombs that we only have would be. So MBD, there's a big fight within MAGA over this. You had a really intense, fierce, emotional Tucker Carlson debate with Ted Cruz over this issue. Everyone wants Trump's ear. Everyone wants to persuade Trump one way or the other, because much as though many of us would like Congress actually to debate such matters and vote on them, that doesn't seem to be in the offing here. We're recording on Friday. As of a day or two ago, it seemed very likely Trump was going to do this, seemed really enamored with the Israeli success, seemed to be wanted to be part of it. And then, who knows, maybe this is a misdirection, a proverbial head fake. Now he says he's going to make the decision within the next 2 weeks. What is your read on the state of play here?
We were always expecting this fight to come between more hawkish and dovish advisors and influencers in the MAGA world, because Donald Trump is a Jacksonian figure, which means he's not principally opposed to using force or principally for transforming the world by the use of American force. And so when the question comes up, there was always going to be a kind of jump ball. And here we are. You saw when Israel began bombing Iran and interrupting the Iran talks with the United States, you saw like the kind of most anti-war MAGA influencers like Tucker Carlson immediately beginning to resist the president and defect and warn him, and with almost an implicit view that the United States not only shouldn't participate in this, but also should influence Israel to cease fighting Iran. You've seen, on the other hand, on Fox News primetime, Mark Levin has kind of had a kind of primetime spot to influence the president and influence the Fox audience, saying like, no, we're going to get behind the president. This is a battle of good versus evil, and you're either with us or you're with the Marxist Islamists. I think, however, there is a kind of broad middle, which includes, some restrainer voices and some hawks that would be okay with some level of U.S. military action, maybe a bombing run, but is not anxious for a long-term engagement with Iran, or anxious to see the regime collapse and then America in a big effort to nation build there. And I think that's kind of where Donald Trump is. I think his decision making is probably predicated on whether he thinks, targeted strikes will end the conflict. He said, like, I like to end wars, not begin them. Or whether he thinks that it's just a prelude to a much longer engagement.
Yeah, so no, I take the point from the restrainers that military operations have unintended consequences. We've been too optimistic about some really big ones over the years. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya ended up being a debacle, although we didn't try to remake Libyan society. We just sort of left it to its own devices. That didn't turn out well either. But it's not as though Donald Trump, as MBD was discussing, is an isolationist, right? He's a Jacksonian. He's willing to hit people when he thinks it's appropriate or thinks it's in our interest or we've been disrespected. So he waged a major campaign in his first term against ISIS, right? That didn't result in disaster. He hit Soleimani, took him out. A lot of warnings about that. That could bring on regional war in the Middle East or even World War III. That worked out okay. So no one is really talking about an invasion of Iran where we occupy it, we change the regime, we try to remake Iran according to our own devices. We're talking about what would be a fairly limited, who knows, things can escalate or slide the wrong way, but what at least what people are talking about in theory, a very limited strike against Fardo and other facilities that Israel can't destroy, even if they can disable on their own.
Yeah, there have been some Republicans in Congress who are issuing wary admonitions, which should be heeded. That wars are easy to get into, hard to get out of. You can plan as much as you like, but the enemy gets a vote, and it's unlikely that this campaign would begin and end with a strike on Fordo with this penetrating ordnance. Iran would retaliate. And we would have to respond if Iran retaliated in a lethal way against, for example, American troops positioned in Iraq. But that was what we experienced after the Soleimani strike. That was a sort of de-escalatory posture on the part of Iran to escalate to de-escalate. But we could see something similar, and it would be incumbent on us to calibrate our own response if we were to affect whatever our strategic objectives are here to neutralize these facilities and to do nothing more. The collapse of the Iranian regime, while desirable, is not an outcome that is envisioned by either American planners or Israeli planners. The cost of waiting could be far graver. Israel's running out of interceptors. You're seeing ballistic missiles now impacting Israeli targets with increasing lethality. And Israel is envisioning an on-the-ground operation, or if Plan B, if the United States does not get involved, which would require a significant footprint of Israeli soldiers infiltrating the Fordo facility and disabling it from the ground, getting those soldiers in there, engaging in armed combat with the Iranian defenders who are on the ground there, exfiltrating them, infinitely more potential for a disaster and a conflagration that would not advance American strategic interests. So while these admonitions are valuable, they should not necessarily preclude action. It is often the case in Washington that a fear of unintended consequences and just an acknowledgement of the fact that we can't even imagine those consequences prescribes doing nothing at all. That we should take zero action in defense of our strategic allies, as Israel is, our most capable strategic ally in the Middle East. There's also this notion that's being bandied about on the MAGA right, to the degree to which they presume to speak for the right, which polling suggests that they shouldn't be doing. Nevertheless, that this is Israel's war. This isn't our war. This is nothing that we should be worried about. Even if you subscribe to that belief, the notion that Israel being threatened by an Iranian bomb doesn't affect Americans' strategic position, considering how central they are to American intelligence gathering, to American interests in the Middle East, is just blinkered, in my view. Second, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been at war with the United States since its inception. It has been the locus of terror in the modern world for 46 years. It killed 1,000 Americans in Iraq directly as a result of its protracted interference during the Iraqi insurgency. And it has executed terror plots on the United States, including assassination plots, and we regularly arrest Iranian Revolutionary Guards officials and Hezbollah terrorists in this country. This is a threat to American national security. An Iranian bomb would complicate American strategic position infinitely, as its terrorist proxies get a lot more risk-prone. It's the sort of thing that we should hope to avert and should act to avert, so I'm unpersuaded by the MAGA movement's critiques.
So, MBD, how do you think of our interests in this conflict and in Iran and in disarming Iran? Because you tilt towards not intervening in such situations, but you're open to it here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the balance of the restrainer sentiment is toward the view that this is Israel's war. That means support, but that also means supporting Israel in this with intelligence, with targeting technology, with whatever assets we have nearby. I think that was a view expressed by Reed Smith, who's kind of one of the kind of chief restrainers in a Foreign Affairs magazine piece that came out yesterday or the day before. I'm a little bit further out, where I think a bombing run could be justified if it could be shown that it would have the intended effect, and we would have a low risk of, engaging in a long-term war afterward. Although, I mean, I would say that, like, theoretically, with the information I have now, I would personally rule out using tactical nuclear weapons, which has been floated and discussed. I think breaking open the nuclear genie is, maybe something to do with saber rattling. That's fine, but I think that could have totally foreseeable and horrible consequences in Ukraine.
Breaking MBD does not want to nuke Iran.
But yeah, I don't want to nuke Iran. So in other words, though, I think I agree with Noah that Iran having a nuclear weapon would embolden its proxies. It would allow it to. It would give it much more latitude to do things that are disruptive, not just to Israel, but to the global economy, as far as what it could do in the straits and in near its territorial waters. What the oil, global oil chain supply that it could threaten. I absolutely agree that this is a threat. It's just not one that justifies any cost to stop. And I think we do have to be prudent. This is a big country, and I think we're seeing totally contrary assessments out of intel officials and ideological advocates about, well, how strong is the Iranian regime right now? How vulnerable is it to internal uprising if it's weakened on the outside by Israel attacking its proxies and the United States humiliating it? And it's very easy to see how one could get dragged along from an attack on one nuclear facility, then meeting any counterattacks on our under-defended outposts in the Middle East that Iran could hit, to suddenly convincing yourselves, well, okay, well, now we're in an existential conflict that can only be satisfactorily resolved by providing law and order ourselves for 92 million souls. And that we've seen this challenge before. Iran is a forbidding society in a lot of ways. It's a lot like Afghanistan. 38% of the marriages there are cousin marriages. So this is not like a good candidate for a democratic government in the future.
Yeah, the Christian norms around marriage are so essential to the how Western civilization developed.
Right. I mean, this is a society where if you want to democratize it, you should be sending Dominican and Franciscan friars on a 1,000-year timeline rather than cruise missiles on a 30-year timeline.
So no, what did you think? A lot of discussion this week about the Tucker interview, debate with Ted Cruz. We all saw that viral moment that Tucker put out as the first clip from this interview where he asked Cruz if he knows the population of Iran. Cruz doesn't know. It's kind of awkward for him. Obviously, a gotcha question. I do think it gets to a point, though, that we don't know a lot about these societies. Certainly didn't know enough about Iraq and Afghanistan going in. But then I've not watched the whole thing. But Ted did find his footing when they're going back and forth about AIPAC. I don't know why particularly AIPAC should be part of the discussion, whether it's a good call for Trump to go into Fardo or not. And eventually Cruz got it around. Wait a minute, why are we talking about AIPAC? Why are you so obsessed with the Jews? And Tucker's like, I'm not obsessed with the Jews. I'm just asking. He literally said, I'm just asking questions.
Yeah, he also almost said, all my friends are Jews, or I have Jewish friends. I find that Tucker Carlson argues in bad faith. I don't think he's making an honest argument. I think the notion that you cannot understand American national security policies in relation to an Islamic Republic nuclear weapon unless you comprehend the per capita GDP of the average Iranian is nonsense. It's a non sequitur, and it makes a mockery of a discussion. There are people who have genuine concerns about the prospect of a broader war in Iran, and those people would limit their conversation to the prospect of a broader war in Iran. Those who do not reveal the degree to which their hostility is not with this mission and not with America's posture towards Iran, which has been at war with the United States, declared by itself since the inception of the Islamic Republic. It is with American hegemony. It is with America's obligations abroad. It is with the degree to which the post-war order is something they resent and want to see overturned. It is an objective that they share with capitals like Moscow and Beijing and Tehran. I don't think they're arguing a position that is motivated by genuine intellectual curiosity. I think they're lobbying, and I think they're afraid to lobby honestly, because to lobby honestly would be to reveal the degree to which they're retailing a position that they're afraid to articulate, which is that we should leave the world to its own devices. We should retreat behind our shores. We do not need allies, problematic allies like the Israelis, like the British, all of it, like the Taiwanese, all the Ukrainians. Somehow, it turns out that whenever our adversaries have trained their thirsty eyes on their neighbors with territorial expansion in mind, or in Iran's case, terror, and its stated position, which is the elimination of the Jewish race from the planet Earth with a couple of atomic blasts, that we should just be okay with that. It doesn't concern us. It's nonsense. It's a blinkered position. It is a view that I don't think they would articulate because it is so profoundly, noxiously ignorant. So no, I don't think Tucker Carlson did himself many favors.
So I think we got that one loud and clear, Noah. MVD?
Listen, I'm not going to speak for every person who's criticized American intervention abroad, but I think I speak for the balance of them that it's not about resenting American hegemony. It's about preserving American power in a prudent way. I mean, we stopped fighting the Houthis a few months ago because of the asymmetries of firing billion-dollar weapons at, $100 Radio Shack.
Oh, Michael, that is not why we stopped.
Well, we also stopped because we were engaging in these talks.
Yeah.
Because our resources are limited. I mean, after October 7th, we lowered the number of deliverable munitions to Ukraine because we were down to delivering them to Israel, and we have a limited number of them and can't produce them fast enough. There are actual numerical, physical limits, and we're not even talking about the limits of the American people's patience for maintaining the commitments their policymakers want to make in a kind of moral fury on their behalf. I mean, ultimately, one of the reasons I think Noah and I have been able to disagree so agreeably in our years together at National Review is we fundamentally agree that there is a kind of equation of American power, which, there's willpower, resources, and commitments, and these have to add up in a way. I believe that, Noah tends to believe that the post-war order that he just spoke about provides so many goods and so many valuable things, and it was built at such great price by our forefathers and our parents and our grandparents. And we have to live up to those commitments, and we ought to live up to them and appreciate them more and dedicate more resources and willpower to them. I believe that this is becoming a baggy, overstretched, overpromised, underdelivered set of commitments that have to be right-sized to the American people's abilities and will and attention. And I think we saw in Ukraine how quickly foreign policy falls into this ditch where you have 80% of Americans saying they support Ukraine. Well, of course they do. Ukraine was unjustly transgressed by Russia in that war. But then less than 50% have supported recent aid packages when they've been proposed in Congress. And these aid packages themselves are not sufficient to roll back Russian aggression. So that's the ditch I fear American foreign policy repeatedly falls into, which is we confuse the nominal support for good foreign policy outcomes with a deep support for the means by which they would be actually achieved. And
so, Michael, let me.
So, by the way, I should say I thought you guys disagreed so agreeably just because you're nice guys, not because you agreed on this equation of American power. But apparently, that's the reason you disagreed so agreeably. Go ahead.
I think it allows us to have a common vocabulary that makes it easier to disagree.
Yeah, got it.
No, I hope I don't come off as churlish, but I am going to challenge the premise. Taking at face value, Michael, the notion that the United States faces material deficiencies that prevent it from realizing its rhetorical commitments. I reject that notion. I think we have a $30 trillion GDP, a defense industrial base that is ramping up on spec and can ramp up further. But let's presuppose that it's right. The United States just doesn't have the ability to defend our many embattled allies. Would you support, then, programs designed to ramp up the American defense industrial establishment and all the costs associated with them?
I support, actually, I do support buildup because I think we need buildup just for the Pacific. But
but
I
not
did
to
not,
support our allies.
but I did not support, expansion of NATO to include 900 miles of more border with Russia, and we have not increased
But that's
any annual.
goalpost moving. That's
We have,
goalpost moving. We were talking about ordnance, defensive ordnance.
right. I know, but I'm
But he's
saying
saying
if
the commitments, they're
we
NATO
recently made
security.
a gigantic expanded commitment of NATO, which includes 900 miles of more border with Russia now in the since the last quadrennial funding of the Pentagon, and we haven't increased. We haven't even discussed what that actually should mean for us as far as an increase of actual material commitments. So we've just made the moral commitment, but we haven't made any material commitments to it and said, okay, well, that obviously means an increase of spending on this kind of monitoring or these kinds of weapons to protect the Nordic countries. So I think our foreign policy is characterized by these kind of, promises without serious reflection on the resources to commit to them. Now, I agree with you, like, on a
There's
GDP
no serious
level,
reflection on the resources that Finland brings to the table. You can make that argument for North
yes, a
Macedonia.
1.5 year commitment to increase military spending is welcome. I agree, but like we've also now made a permanent commitment to their security.
Finland is not a dependency when it comes to policing its 900-mile border with Russia. It can do that on its own.
But guys,
Well, but it's with our nuclear umbrella
it
that they're
seems
doing it.
it seems obvious to me that you're both right. MBD is right. There are real physical material constraints on anyone's power. And Noah's right. You can affect it by your willpower and how much you're willing to spend on it and how big your military is.
Right. And our military, we are now doing better with recruitment than we were under the Biden administration. But we have we do have limits. I agree with Noah. We have the GDP to take on more. I mean, we could also like turn our civilization into a Spartan one. We could institute a draft, put everyone in the military for a number of years to increase our
One of the great ironies about Sparta, by the way,
and
they're very reluctant, even though it's a militarized society, they're very reluctant to fight because they're always worried about revolts from their servile, the Helots. They're very much restrainers in your mode, MBD.
right. So in case, I do think there are these limits, and I do support a build up on some level of deficit spending to meet what I think of as a kind of once a century challenge that China presents, which I think we can deter in the Pacific without a major war. But I do think that deterrence will come at a price that we're not currently paying, even as we're still pinned down in Eastern Europe and potentially soon to be pinned down again in the Middle East. We talk about like walking and chewing gum at the same time, but I actually don't think these are pedestrian efforts. Like, I don't think it's a, a, a nice way to analogize. I mean,
I just find it remarkable that the Trump administration's foreign policy hands are making all of the Obama administration's mistakes and then encountering the setbacks that Obama encountered and being surprised by them. Yes, the former president wanted to pivot to Asia, so he withdrew combat divisions from Europe. The final tank division that had been on European soil since 1945 and 2013, and 8 months later, Russia invaded Ukraine, suddenly recommitting us to the continent. Yes, Obama wanted to get us out of the Middle East, so he raced American troops out of Iraq, only to return at a time and place not of their choosing, because he decided that the world would cooperate with his objectives, and it didn't. The world does not cooperate when you create vacuums. It fills them, usually with bad actors, and it prevents us from realizing the very policy withdrawal is designed to produce.
All right, so this is to be continued, and it's been a long-running debate among you guys, and it is fascinating and enlightening. But let's get back. I'm going to start with you, MBD. Two extra questions to get us out of this conversation, going back to Iran. So where do you put the odds, if you had to rate it 0 to 10, that Trump will end up striking Iran? 0, he's not going to do it. 10, it's a certainty. And 0 to 10, let's say at the end of the year, the Iranian regime still exists. 0, it will still exist. 10, it's a goner.
if you'd asked me 48 hours ago, I would have said it's a 10, or Donald Trump will bomb Iran. I would now probably put it at 7, although I think it could happen as soon as we hang up the phone with each
Yeah.
other, and it could happen this weekend. There's some voices saying that already. The chances that the Iranian regime will survive to the end of the year, I mean, I think there's a zero. I would put it at 0. There's little chance of it being overthrown and changing by the end of the year. Maybe 0.5. They're to allow for
Slender. But you don't buy the idea. There's some people who just think it just loses this program. There's some people even say just Fardo goes, and that's fundamentally destabilizing the regime because it's invested so much in this, so much pain for the Iranian people, so much expense, and poof, it's gone. They haven't gotten anything out of it. They haven't gotten electricity out of it. They haven't gotten deterrent out of it.
I think the Iranian state, even if a terrible state, provides certain goods of law and order or justice at a certain level that people would be afraid to trade for the complete unknown. I think the Iranian state probably plays a role in Iranian society that we don't appreciate, how it interacts with popular opinion enough. I think we probably overrate liberal Tehran just as we overrated liberal Kabul in Afghanistan, and its power to kind of control the whole countryside. So, yeah, I am skeptical that this thing is just gonna fall over.
So
I mean,
no,
again,
MBD is at a 7, more likely than not, a Trump attack, and a 0.5 on the regime falling by the end of the year.
So on Monday, I was 75% that the United States would join this operation.
That seemed
I'm
like a really
less.
good number for the next 24 hours.
Sure did. I'm a little less now. I'm going to go 65%, just because the president has retreated to his preferred 2 weeks from now formula. We'll figure something out. So I anticipate that he's going to allow the Israeli operation to continue, perhaps up to the point that it flirts with and endures quite a bit more lethality and bloodshed than it already has, and sacrifice some of the strategic initiative that Israel has secured for the United States in the process. I do suspect that once that strategic initiative begins to be lost, the president and his advisors will take stock of it and stop dithering. But I'm less sure of that than I was on Monday. With regard to the Iranian regime, whether it survives or not, I do think that this ends with a negotiated solution. Unfortunately, with the Islamic Republic still intact, I'm not 100% on that. I think perhaps there's a 10-25% chance between that range that the Islamic Republic collapses. The violent export of the Islamic Revolution is a central pillar, a tenet of this regime. The bomb is designed to advance that. In the absence of that, the regime loses quite a lot of legitimacy. Whatever legitimacy it retains, this regime kills children. This regime kills women. It executes and enslaves, by virtue of coercion and resource pilfering, its citizenry. It is not beloved. And the Israeli military has begun attacking the sources of terror of this regime: the hated besieged police, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of the Interior, all of the Ministry of Intelligence. All of these are the symbols of the terror regime that keeps its people in chains. When they start to fall, we may see a much more bold response especially from Tehran, where there is understood to be a fairly Western population that is pretty capable and has a fair amount of resources. It's not necessarily the same in the countryside or religious sites like Qum, but in the capital you could see something like that unfolding if this campaign begins to shake the public's faith in the ability of the regime to maintain the terror apparatus that keeps them subservient.
So I'm really tempted on whether Trump will strike or not to do the cop-out 50%, go right at 5. I guess I'll scooch just above that and say 5.5. But I think this thing is a real jump ball. And he, it's one of those things he doesn't know, right? So how am I supposed to know? But I think maybe slightly likelier than not that he's going to do this. I think the Israelis can do it on their own. There's some way they can do it on their own, but it's either highly risky and or suboptimal, whether it's hitting the electricity, hitting the ventilation system, blowing up the tunnel entrances. all of which would disable it for some period of time, but could be repaired. And then you have to do the so-called, as they call it, mowing the lawn. You have to go back every 2 or 3 months and do it again. And you just don't want to keep doing that because eventually they'll have, air defenses around it, serious air defenses around it again, or just get a lucky shot, and you could be in a different situation. So it'd be easier and better if we went and did it. And I think Trump does. This is a badass operation as far as he's concerned. He has been impressed by the success. He has been. This is one of the things he's been totally consistent on, going back at least. I think the earliest expression of this sentiment I've seen was a 2011 tweet from Trump where he says Iran can't have a nuclear weapon just randomly when he's a private citizen. So I think he would see the logic of it. It'd be a real shame to go through all this and still leave Fardo, basically intact, even if it's been temporarily disabled. So I say a little more likely than not, and I think the regime is very likely to survive, but it's not a certainty. So maybe I put it at a 2 that would fall by the end of the year. This is highly embarrassing. Israel has gone a little more wider in their strikes, not just with regard to the nuclear assets, but to supports of the regime. And if they keep missiling Israel, every indication they are, there's a natural tendency for these sort of wars to widen, or the goals of the war to widen rather than narrow. So Israel could hit them harder and more broadly, and eventually that could really tell. So with that, thanks so much, guys, for a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Noah, and thank you, MBD. All right, thanks, guys. That was good.
Thank you.
How long was that?
Thanks. Half hour.
Half hour. All right.
No, I just want to ask: do you would you trade a policy of no enrichment for an effective policy of regime security for Iran, where basically, like, the U.S. says, like, we're not going to participate in any, military attacks or undermining or subterfuge of the regime from now on, in exchange for no enrichment beyond civilian use?
I think what we would be trading there is our aspirational desire to live in peace and security with our